judge me on what I do. I don't label myself a lot of things, but it doesn't mean that I'm unhappy or uncomfortable if other people say, oh, Julie's a feminist because she supports equal opportunity and gender equality. What about look at what I do as opposed to how I self-describe?
From Mamma Mia, I'm Mia Friedman, and you're listening to No Filter, candid conversations that count. Julie Bishop hasn't been a private citizen for 20 years, but a few hours after this interview was recorded, that changed because an election was called. As the member for Curtin, she'd been the deputy leader of the Liberal Party for 11 years under 3 different leaders, and for the past few years she'd been the Foreign Minister of Australia. She was the first woman to serve in either of those roles, and people on all sides pretty much agree that she did a kick-ass job. There was terrorist attacks, Bali executions, the shooting down of Malaysian Airlines flight MH17, an Ebola outbreak, and of course, a few rounds of prime ministerial musical chairs. Isn't that a fun game? She's a woman who loves fashion as much as politics, and she sees no problem when the two things collide. Like that time she wore a pair of tailored shorts with a matching jacket to meet with the Mayor of London, or the killer red heels with sparkles she wore on the day she announced she'd be stepping down as Foreign Minister and moving to the backbench. You might remember that difficult decision came after a particularly bruising episode of the Parliament House reality show where the Liberal Party decided to play Knife the Leader yet again. When Malcolm Turnbull stood down, Julie put up her hand to run for PM, along with Scott Morrison and Peter Dutton. But she was knocked out, fairly brutally, in the first round as a result of some pretty disappointing backroom deals that we all learned about via a leaked group chat between many of her fellow MPs. It was messy and disloyal and a deeply anticlimactic end to a glittering career in politics. Not that Julie ever said that publicly, none of it. She's worked through some of Australia's ugliest moments both in Canberra and around the world with her signature class and style. She's always towed the party line. But now, she doesn't have to. Now she can say whatever she wants, however she wants to. Here's Julie Bishop. Julie, we're both sitting here in our white shirts. We're all sitting here, actually. Everyone in the studio is wearing a white shirt. What's the significance?
Today we launched the 2019 White Shirt campaign, and which we donate 100% of the gross proceeds of the sale of white shirts to ovarian cancer research and the foundation set up to develop an early stage detection test, because there isn't one for ovarian cancer. Because there's no early symptoms, no warning, most women are diagnosed at advanced stages, and so the death rate is high compared with other cancers.
Compared to, say, when you first came into Parliament in 1998, how much more understanding and awareness around women's health issues do you think there is in Canberra these days?
Oh, so much more. It's a dramatic difference. And it's taken some rather tragic events like the death of Senator Jeannie Ferris, she died of ovarian cancer, to really focus people's attention on it. That's why it's so important to have more women in Parliament, more women in the decision-making forums around the world, because we do have a different experience, a different perspective, and issues like women's health are raised by women. Men, of course, understand, but in terms of a priority, women's health has tended to be a secondary issue. Now it's a primary issue, it's a priority, and I was delighted to see the government provide more money. In fact, I think since we came to office about 33 million had been dedicated to ovarian cancer research, and that's why I'm so keen to do more. The government can't do it all. The community also has to dig in and support women who have this cancer.
What's life like on the outside now? I noticed you said we. Is that gonna take a while to change?
I guess it will. I've been in politics for 20 years now, so I've been saying we for a very long time, sort of like the royal family, we. But I had my last day in Parliament, and it was a mix of emotions, sadness, pride, relief, and excitement about what may lie ahead. So I had a 20-year legal career, a 20-year political career. Now I'm looking for another 20-year career in a whole range of different areas.
You mentioned a lot of emotions that you had on that last day, and I watched your speech and I watched it again today before you came in.
It has been an immense honour to be the longest serving member for Curtin, and also to be the deputy leader of the Liberal Party. the first female to hold the role for 11 years, over half my entire political career. And I'm also proud of the fact that I am the first woman to contest the leadership ballot of the Liberal Party in its 75-year history.
And I felt bitter when I watched you. You would never say that because you're far too classy. But I watched that and I felt angry and I felt resentful and I felt bitter that you are such an extraordinary woman and you would have made such an extraordinary Prime Minister and you never got that chance.
My opportunity came in unexpected circumstances last year. I would never have challenged a leader from the position as deputy, and so I served under a number of leaders. But when circumstances changed to the extent that Malcolm Turnbull wasn't going to run again, and there were two candidates in Peter Dutton and Scott Morrison, I felt a real responsibility to put my name forward so the party room had other options. And I'd been the deputy for 11 years and I'd been foreign minister for 5 years. I'd been a cabinet minister under John Howard, under Tony Abbott, under Malcolm Turnbull. So I thought I had the experience, and obviously you don't put your name forward if you think you're going to lose, nor do you put your name forward if you think you'd lose the election. So I put my hand up. The party room obviously saw otherwise, and I respect that. I've been a member of that party room for 20 years, so you have to respect the views of your colleagues. But I thought that that then made me reassess how much longer I wanted to be in politics. And so I didn't cause a by-election. I stayed. I went onto the backbench and let the new team get on with being the new government. And then over that period of time, I thought long and hard about what I wanted to do. And then I met a number of people who said that if I were not standing at the next election, they would run for the seat of Curtin. And I thought, yeah, now's the time to leave. So it's a time of my choosing on my terms. And, Mia, there's no point in feeling bitter. You just have to be positive about the future. And so I don't look back. I don't do regrets. I don't do recriminations. I just say, okay, now it's time for the next chapter.
You've been through, you've been in Parliament through, I think it's 5 leadership changes or changes of Prime Minister.
I've
in
lost
the
count.
system. Yes, there's so many. I've spoken to a lot of journalists about what that time is like around a leadership change and spills. What's it like when you're inside? What's it like when it's happening to people who are your colleagues and your friends and you're involved?
I witnessed it first on the Labor side when Kevin Rudd was challenged by Julia Gillard, and it was morbidly fascinating to watch a party tear itself apart. I did never think it would happen to us because I assumed that, I've done it again, us, because I assumed that it took such a toll on the Labor Party. But then they changed again. They got rid of Julia Gillard and installed Kevin Rudd. So it became the norm. It set a benchmark. And
a very low benchmark.
Indeed. And then I served under Tony Abbott. He was our leader into the 2013 election that we won. And then over time, I saw that he was losing the support of the party room. And in our political system, in the Liberal Party, the leader is chosen by the party room. And that can be frustrating for the wider public because they say, well, I voted in the Liberal Party because I wanted to see XYZ as the Prime Minister. And then the party room says, well, we don't want to work with this person anymore, and without going to an election, we'll change leaders. That does cause instability. Being on the inside, it's a very emotional time because people are pitted against each other. It's very adversarial, competitive. Things are said that shouldn't be said, things are done that shouldn't be done. So there's a lot of turmoil involved, which is why I recommend that parties give up changing leaders between elections unless there's a very valid, cogent, coherent reason to do so.
Some very close relationships must be formed, when you're in a party for 20 years. How do people process the betrayal that comes around these leadership changes and spills? Because it's like you got to pick a side and it's like, I thought you were with me and maybe you said you were with me, but then you weren't with me. There were some text messages and a WhatsApp group that you found out about afterwards that must have been absolutely devastating on a bunch of levels. Does it make you question who really ever was your friend or colleague?
Well, sadly, politics has a name for that, for betrayal, for conflict between people who others presumed were colleagues, or indeed they may well have presumed it. Was it Paul Keating that said, if you want a friend in politics, buy a dog?
Mm-hmm.
There's a certain amount of truth in that, but I've also made friends in politics that I suspect will be friends for life. It's difficult, and it takes you some time to understand that this is the way it's played. But of course you can still be hurt and frustrated and angry, but there's no point, because that's the way it is. And politics in Australia has been a system built by men, because for the last 100 years since Federation, the majority of parliamentarians have been male. And so it's very adversarial, and it reflects the way men see the world. It's only in more recent years that women have become involved in politics. So the culture is very male, and I think that that has a fair amount to do with it.
You said you've been in cabinets where there are a number of women and when you've been the only woman.
Yes.
And you said that you've noticed that the behaviour of the cabinet is very different. Can you explain the differences?
Well, I think a number of women would relate to this if they've been the only woman in a boardroom or in a meeting, and I was in cabinet. If you're the only female voice in a room of, say, 20, 30 males, they tend not to hear you. I called it gender deafness. And I don't know what it is, but you struggle to be heard, even if what you're saying is original or different or controversial, outrageous even. There seems to be a glossing over, and they move on to the next opinion. And then somebody can say precisely what you said, and the men will say, yeah, that's a good idea. Let's go with XYZ's view. And yet when other women are around the room, most women tend to support the other woman, saying, hang on, did you just hear what she said, and bring attention to it. I also think that women's perspectives are so important, and you have to have more women around these boardroom tables and cabinet tables and decision-making forums. They bring a different perspective, a different view, a different experience, and without overgeneralising, women do have different leadership style to men. They do. We're much more transformational. We're much more focused on the impact on the individual. We build.
What do you mean by transformational?
Well, we build teams by working with individuals, whereas men are much more transactional. The team's put together, they hold the team to account. They're far less empathetic to the individual needs, whereas women focus very much on the empathy behind what's happening.
The emotional intelligence of
all of
the
that
situation.
And I've seen it, not just in politics, I've seen it in many scenarios. I was a partner in a major law firm for many years, and at one point I was the only female in the partnership meetings. And women do bring a different perspective. Now, it's not one or the other. You need both. They complement each other. And that's why I'm speaking about encouraging more women to come into Parliament. The processes will be different. The outcomes will be better. Corporates see this now. It's not just the right thing to do, it's a smart thing to do.
Mm.
Corporations can see that if you have more women in decision-making positions, your bottom line is going to be better.
Because smart business, isn't it?
Absolutely.
And it can also be transformational for society when it comes to government. You know, we were just talking about $30 million going to endometriosis and ovarian cancer. You would ask, I imagine, 100 men, and probably 90 of them wouldn't be able to even tell you anything about those two things, probably wouldn't even know what endometriosis was.
Exactly. And so you do need women
around the table
to explain some of these issues and say, well, actually, this is an issue that women feel strongly about. And unless a man has a very strong female in his life, he may well not know about it. So it's just common sense, reflecting community concerns, and 50% of our population is female.
44% of Labor Party MPs are women, 18% of Liberal Party MPs are women. And yet quotas is a dirty word and all the men are there by merit, of course, we know that. You don't have to toe that line anymore. How do you really feel about that?
I really feel that we do need targets that are taken seriously.
What's the difference between a target and a quota?
A quota's mandatory, and Labor don't actually adhere to a quota. They say they do, but they don't. I've seen when it's a woman's turn to be pre-selected for a seat, but there's a former union boss who's looking for that seat and they'll take it. So it's not actually...
So targets give you a bit more wriggle room. It's like, this is our intention, but don't hold us to it.
But targets taken seriously have a great effect. I've seen it. We did it in the Turnbull Cabinet when we decided to make it a 50% target for all government board positions. And there are thousands of positions in statutory bodies and agencies and government councils that the federal government appoints. And we were at about, maybe 40% or something. And we made a concerted effort. We set a target of 50%. And just after I left Cabinet, we hit 50%. What it does is it makes people much more aware of the responsibility to find more women. And so if a Cabinet Minister came in with 4 names for a position and none of them were women, we'd say go away and find some women. And it means they have to work harder. The women are there. It's not about competence or merit or qualifications. The women are there.
They're willing, but
you have to dig a little bit deeper and often ask, because women are very reluctant to put themselves forward, very reluctant to say, yeah, I'm up for this. And so often I found, I had to make a number of appointments. I would ring a woman and say, I'd love you to go on XYZ board. And they'd say, oh, do you think I'm right for it? A man would never ask you that. He'd say yes or no, whether they want it or not. But women say, a little bit concerned that they might not have the qualifications, they might not be up to the mark. So that's why it's important for other women to support women into these roles. So targets work. The Liberal Party has a way to go. And I've been part of a new group in Western Australia called Emergent Women, where we have gone out and identified young women between about the ages of 25 and 40 in business, in community groups, in the professions, and asked them to come along to a few events. They don't have to join the Liberal Party, just come along and be part of debates on policy issues, on matters of concern to them. And we are building a pool of women so that when a pre-selection comes up, you actually have a pool to draw from, a pipeline of women who would be ready, mentored, hopefully, into what it's like to be a politician.
It must be a pretty hard ask, though, trying to convince women to come along and be part of the Liberal Party, given the last year, given we've seen Kelly Dwyer leave, we've seen Julia Banks claim that she was bullied, and Anna Samalis also that she was subject to bullying. You were treated really shabbily, I believe, and left. Why would women want to join a party that seems to have such, in some cases, open contempt for women, and that certainly, even at best, does not seem to be a place where a woman could thrive in a political career?
Well, I don't accept your characterisation. I was the deputy leader of the party for 11 years, re-elected time and time again by my colleagues, so they had faith in me as the deputy, and I was appointed to my dream job, which was Minister for Foreign Affairs. I couldn't have been more honoured or privileged in a role. And so from my point of view, women have achieved some great things in the Liberal Party. What we need to do is encourage young people to be interested in public office generally. That's men and women, because politicians tend to be
on the nose?
Yeah, condemned roundly for whatever they do, whether they're doing good things or bad things. And as a class, though, they are not highly regarded. And so it is one of the most important jobs in the country. You're a legislator. You're part of making the laws that affect our lives. So we want high-quality people, people who represent the broad spectrum of the Australian community, interested in public life. So I see it as a responsibility of all politicians to encourage more people to consider public office as part of their career path.
I don't want to do the gotcha thing and ask you the question about feminism, but I also kind of do. Not in a gotcha way, but I'm just... In 2016, you were asked, are you a feminist? And you were kind of... It's become this thing. Are you a feminist? Are you a feminist? And you said at the time, I'm from Western Australia, I'm a foreign minister, I'm a Liberal, but other than that, I'm not really into labels. Other people can call me what they want. Is that still your view?
Yeah. I don't understand why people keep asking me with the greatest respect. Judge me on what I do. I don't label myself a lot of things, but it doesn't mean that I'm unhappy or uncomfortable if other people say, oh, Julie's a feminist because she supports equal opportunity and gender equality. What about look at what I do, and as opposed to how I self-describe? It's just not a label I've ever attached to myself. And if I started doing it now, I think it would be lacking in authenticity. So the media, it's kind of a game now, not on my part, but the media say, are you yet a feminist? And I keep saying, well, have a look at what I do.
Yeah.
I support women. I focus on gender equality. I put gender equality at the heart of our foreign policy. I directed our aid budget to ensuring that it had positive impact on women and girls. The empowerment of women and girls was a key theme of my foreign ministry. So,
and you have been and remain such a role model for so many women in and out of politics.
Let's not get hung up on labels. The reason I said I'm a Liberal, I'm a West Australian, is somebody put to me, oh, but we don't know enough about you. If you don't call yourself a feminist, how do we know who you are? And I said, well, I can tell you I'm a Liberal, so that tells you my political views. I'm a West Australian, that tells you where I'm from. I've been a lawyer and now I'm a politician, that tells you what I do. So I was basically saying you don't need labels, just have a look at what I do.
What you do is beyond reproach in terms of equality. But when you say I'm a Liberal and that's a word that describes my politics.
Well, it describes me.
Isn't feminism also that? Like I guess I call myself a feminist to describe the fact that equality, gender equality and is at the forefront of who I am and what I stand for.
People can call themselves whatever they like. I'm perfectly relaxed. I don't demand that other people call themselves this, that or the other, and I don't see why people should demand of me that I self-describe in a way that doesn't reflect my thinking. Now, my thinking is, as a Liberal, I'm into individual freedom and choice, and that to me is about gender equality, the freedom to choose, the freedom to be, and that's what I've sought to achieve in my time as a legislator, somebody who helped make decisions on behalf of the Australian public.
I guess the reason people say, has it changed is, I watched John Howard being interviewed at the end of last year and again just saying it's merit. We don't need quotas. We don't need anything. It should just be merit, 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 merit. And I don't know, I suppose the perception that you would maybe be frustrated with that argument and not necessarily agree with it.
But that's why I've been talking about targets. I've seen quotas not work. I've seen the perverse impact of quotas, where people have been appointed because they had to, because there's a quota. And that's not the right outcome either. Nobody wants to say, I'm there because they needed to fill a quota. No man, no woman wants to say that. I wouldn't have thought so.
When you were Foreign Minister, you spent 50% of your time overseas, 25% in Canberra and 25% in Perth. Was that right?
I think it's about that. Yeah, that's right.
I imagine...
Or maybe it was a third. No, 2/3, 1/3 between Canberra and the rest of the country.
I imagine you probably spent about 30% of your time on a plane.
I did sleep.
A lot of time.
I did sleep overnight many times on a plane.
You must have become a very good flyer. What was your routine?
Well, I just didn't have the luxury of jet lag. You just couldn't do it because I would fly when Parliament wasn't sitting, and not many foreign ministers have had to be in a Parliament where you had to be present. I mean, we didn't have a majority, and
so you couldn't miss a vote.
Or we had a one-seat majority at one point, and then it's less than that. And so I had to be there for votes. I was also the deputy leader, which meant I had to, fill in for the Prime Minister and had a lot of demands across the country. And so when I went overseas, we had to be as effective and as efficient as possible. So we often flew overnight from country to country, not sleeping in hotels and sleeping on the plane, and then getting back and starting a full day. So you didn't have days off in between to recover. So I decided that I couldn't do jet lag. We'd have to get rid of that notion. Not an option. And I would always try and get some sleep on the plane. always start the day with a run. Didn't matter what time I got in the night before or even early morning. I'd trick my body into thinking it's 5:30 a.m, time for a run, and I would run, great for the endorphins, and that's a really good way to start the day. But it also got you into the routine of the day, and that's important.
How would you know?
Don't think about what time it is back home.
Where to run? Like, how does that work? I noticed two things. Firstly, you always seem to be running with purpose, even if I imagine you'd wake up some days and not even know where you were. So does someone map out the route for you? And I also noticed that you don't tend to run with earbuds or earphones in.
Well, if I were travelling overseas, the Embassy and the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade would put together my itinerary, my schedule for the day, and they would include, at my request, they would include a morning run. And so my security detail would work that out in advance, and they would check out the places to run and not run. I remember one day we were running through the traffic in Jakarta, and the federal police officer with me said, "This wasn't my idea. I didn't want you running through the traffic." So I didn't always take their advice, but they would work out a route, and depending upon how much time I had, we would run half an hour. And it
Did
was
they
just
have to find you very fit people to be your security detail? How did that work?
They came to that conclusion after I left one of the federal police officers, I shouldn't say this, should I, a long way behind, and I had to run back and get him, and I thought, this isn't the way it's meant to work, is it?
It's not a job for everybody having to keep up with you.
So they did get to a point where they would ask for volunteers, so I knew that whoever was coming running would be able to last the distance.
How far would you run every morning? What's your
somewhere
run?
Between 6 and 10 Ks.
And do you have a rhythm with that? You don't listen to music?
No, I don't. I like to be very aware of my surroundings, and particularly when I was running in exotic places overseas, I wanted to absorb the sounds and smells and the visual observations were so important to me. And because so often we were in a place that would mean I'd come in from the airport, I'd stay in a hotel, I'd go to a conference, I'd get back in the car, go back to the airport, I wouldn't see the city. So the run in the morning was an opportunity for me to get the vibe of a place. And I tell you, there's nothing more exciting than running through the streets of New York at 5:30 a.m. when the street cleaners are there and the people are just opening up their stalls. And whether it was in Suva or Port Moresby or Mumbai, I would always run around a part of the city to get the feeling of it, and it was fantastic.
You're not a treadmill girl?
No, not at all. If I can run outside, I'll be outside. A gym is a last option.
With all the work you had to do as foreign minister and as a politician in general, but particularly as a foreign minister, a lot of dinners, state dinners, banquets, 10-course meals, plain food. I imagine hotel rooms. How did you plan that part of your life, just the eating part? And a lot of time I imagine you wouldn't have control necessarily over what you ate.
It's very interesting. I should write a book on the banquets I've attended. It was a challenge because you don't want to offend your hosts, and I think the key to it is just eat small portions of all of it, try a bit of everything, and don't overdo the dessert. But, I say that, it's just, I'm just saying it. Don't overdo the dessert. I've got the sweet tooth from hell, I really do. I love chocolate. But I would just try and be careful. And then sometimes I would fast on the plane. I wouldn't eat on a plane, and then I wouldn't feel so guilty about having to sit through a 5-course meal or more.
Would you have routines in your hotel room in terms of what you do to make yourself
or try not
all
to
these
eat.
different places? Try not to eat the minibar.
Yeah, try not to go near the minibar. That's a start.
Because it's very unsettling, the idea of sleeping in different beds all the time. And
yes, well, when you're away for, say, what was about 110 nights overseas, there were times when I would wake up and then feel around me. Okay, where's my phone? Where's the light switch? Where am I? Where's the bathroom door? Yeah, that would happen. Wake up and think, okay, Tuesday must be Belgium.
What's my hotel room number? I've forgotten. Where even am
I? There have been occasions when I've been trying to remember. Somebody will say, what was XYZ hotel like? And I'll think, I stayed there. And I'll try and visualise what it looked like in my mind. And then I'll remember something like, the passageway. Or remember the breakfast room. Yeah, something will come back to me and I'll remember
Or
the
where
hotel.
you went for a run.
I remember my runs very well.
How do you pack?
With great difficulty. It's like a military operation, rolling, folding, trying to work out day by day what I'm going to need to wear. And this is something that guys just don't get, because they can put in suits, shirts, ties, done. But for a woman, you're expected to take a cocktail frock if there's an event, or a suit, or, your running gear. And so if I were going away, sometimes for 10 days at a time, I sit at home and go through day by day, well, I'll wear that outfit that day, that one, and go through it, and then work out the weather and is it going to be hot, cold? Because often, I remember my last overseas trip as Foreign Minister, we went from North Asia to Southeast Asia to Samoa and back to Sydney. And so it was going Northern Hemisphere, Southern Hemisphere, formal, casual, and everything in between. So you just, over time, you learn to pack for any and all occasions.
Do you do your own hair and makeup? Because that's another sort of tax on women in the public eye that men don't have to pay in terms of time.
Oh, unless I'm doing a TV interview, and you know how they have makeup rooms, and they make you look younger and brighter and fresher. But otherwise, no, I do my own hair and makeup, and I don't have a stylist. I do my own clothes shopping.
I noticed you love fashion,
yes,
which we all love about you.
Well, I don't apologise for it.
No.
It's who I am, and if you want authentic politicians, you just got to accept the fact that I love fashion. I always have, and I always will.
Your fashion style changed a few years ago, I noticed. You used to wear sort of brightly coloured jackets and pearls. And then you started wearing a lot of Armani, more edgy clothes, more dark colours. You became more, I would say, contemporary and more fashion
there's
forward.
a story behind this.
Please tell it to me.
It's amazing. As a lawyer, I wore suits a lot because that's kind of the professional uniform, and I bought my first Armani suit as a partner in a law firm. Saved up enough and bought an Armani suit. I thought, yep, love it. When I was first appointed to the ministry, I was asked to be the Minister for Aged Care, for ageing. And one of the Prime Minister's senior advisors rang me and said, Julie, take this the right way, but forget the Armani suits, forget the corporate look. You're the Minister for Ageing. You're going into aged care homes. You've got to dress appropriately. And I'm there, I don't know, this is a guy telling me, what do you mean? What do you want me to wear? Like, I am who I am. I've been a professional career woman for quite some time now.
And I know how to get dressed.
I know how to get dressed. He said, and I said, what, you mean like cardigans? And this is before Michelle Obama turned cardigans into a fashion item. I said, like cardigans? He goes, yeah, more prints, more colour, more, down, just not corporate. So you'll see me as Minister for Ageing looking like they expected me to look. And then I thought, this is ridiculous. Don't let other people define who you are, what you wear. Be authentic. And so I just decided one day, I've had enough of that. I'm going to dress the way I want to dress.
I love it. I was watching Amanda Vanstone on You Can't Ask That, the ABC show, and she strikes me as someone who also just really knows her style. She wears her bright prints, short sleeve shirts with her skirts or her slacks, and that's just her.
Well, that's right. And you wear what makes you feel comfortable, happy. Dress for yourself, don't dress for others. And I made that mistake. So I now dress very much for myself. And sure, you get criticised for it, but if I feel comfortable, if I'm happy with what I'm wearing, that's enough.
Julie, how do you date when you're a politician and you're the foreign minister? I mean, I imagine there's no shortage of men around you all the time, but how do you actually have any kind of romantic or personal life?
Well, I have a lovely partner.
You
David.
do indeed. How did you guys meet?
Through Bruce Baird. See, you can have friends in politics. Bruce was the first person that I met when I became a new Member of Parliament back in 1998. He had the office opposite mine, and we just struck up a friendship. We became friends, and we're friends to this day. He introduced us.
And you've been together, you and David, for about 5 years or so now, and you used to travel a lot together. At one point, I think Melania Trump confused you with one of the wives.
Yeah, she thought...
Tell me that story.
Well, I get into trouble with the White House when I tell this story. But Melania...
Doesn't matter anymore.
No, Melania assumed that David was the foreign minister and that I was the partner. And she asked me to her lunch, the partners' lunch the next day, and I said, "Oh no, David's going." And she was very puzzled. Why would Australia's foreign minister turn up at my ladies' lunch? But she obviously worked it out the next day when David did turn up at the lunch, and he said he had a wonderful time. So there you go.
He did.
I bet he did too.
He has to be pretty secure to be dating you. You're pretty formidable and accomplished and beautiful and all of those things.
No, he's a very special person.
Can I ask you about a few different people?
Sure.
Barack Obama.
Yes, I met him on a number of occasions. He was a very cool, calm person. He had a delightful sense of humour, but he was very laid back, a lot more informal than I had expected. And he was, fun to be around. I met him here in Australia and in Washington and in New York. And on every occasion, he would call you by your first name. There was a real informality about him that was quite charming.
He seems to have worn his role, I guess, quite lightly, like heavily in terms of he took it. He was very responsible, obviously, and an extraordinary leader, but he seemed to not take himself too seriously. He seemed like he would be quite fun to be around.
He seemed to be quite relaxed in the role.
Yeah.
And that was quite an attractive quality. Being around, he was the leader of the free world.
Yeah.
The world's only superpower, and you're the president. It's a very substantial role, let's face it. But he seemed to be very relaxed, remarkably relaxed in the role.
Did you read Michelle Obama's Becoming, her
I
book?
started. I
Yeah.
haven't finished it. I've got about 8 books on the go.
I imagine you met her a number of times too.
Yes, I did. She's charming, delightful, likewise, very accessible, very informal, and very tall. She's beautiful. They're both very tall. I had my photograph taken with them a number of times, and I felt like this tiny little person between these two glamazons. It was a bit intimidating.
Did you meet Donald Trump?
Yes, Donald
How'd that
and
go?
Melania.
I know you have to be diplomatic.
I met the president on a number of occasions. He is quite unorthodox. He's very confident, self-confident, and again, because I was Australia's foreign minister, he was very warm and welcoming. I don't know that we appreciate how highly regarded Australia is on the world stage. And so it was such an honour to be Australia's foreign minister and turning up at these forums and meetings and conferences and the United Nations time and time again. And people seemed genuinely pleased to see you and genuinely respectful of your view because you were from Australia, a country that is very highly regarded.
Haven't we lost a lot of skin in the last few years? The Italy of the Pacific and just with this ridiculous kangaroo style in and out of...
I was contacted by
office.
a number of counterparts overseas who were puzzled. They were perplexed because that's not the image they had of Australia. We're one of the longest standing democracies in modern times, and people always equated Australia to political stability. I mean, many other things as well: open liberal democracy, freedom, the rule of law, an open export-oriented market economy. There are things about Australia that stand the test of time. And this just went against their understanding of Australia. And why were we changing prime ministers? And then what was the reason for it? And they would be expecting some, deep, substantial, philosophical, ideological divide. And it came down to, well, they don't like working with him.
That's pretty much why Malcolm Turnbull went. Like, can anyone still to this day explain what just happened?
Well, I certainly wasn't the instigator of it, so I had no cause to want to see Malcolm leave, and I thought the polling was heading in the right direction, and I was confident that Malcolm would win the next election. But likewise, I'm confident that Scott Morrison will win the election. So the policies do matter, and I think the Australian people trust the coalition on economic management and national security, and they're the two tenets, if you like, of a federal government. When
you met a lot of foreign diplomats and leaders, what were their ideas about Australia? Like, what did they want to talk to you about? Was it koalas? Was it about Kylie Minogue? Like, what was their pop cultural understanding of where we sit in the world? Many of them had visited Australia, and their reference point was normally how clean and open and free we are as a society. And that's why when there was the Lindt Cafe,
attack, for example, people were shocked. Again, that's not what they expected to happen in Australia. And so we're seen as a country that is the envy of the world in so many ways. We're economically successful. We have a lifestyle second to none. And the people are friendly. So that's the image people have of us overseas. Many foreign ministers, for example, had been to Australia. A number had not. Now, this is an interesting one. John Kerry was US Secretary of State, long-standing foreign policy expert, and he came to Australia in 2016 as part of what's called AUSMIN, the Australia-US Ministerial Dialogue. He had never been to Australia, and I was quite taken aback by that. How could that possibly be? A senior public figure in the US who'd been a senator for 30 years had never found his way to Australia. Anyway, I remember the first press conference and he was saying to the media, I've never been to Australia before. And then I took him aside and said, I wouldn't tell them that again. I wouldn't, because they're just going to ask you, why the hell not? But he was enchanted by the place. We had the meeting at Admiralty House, so in Sydney.
Nice view.
And we took the Navy's barge from the Opera House steps, the Man of War steps, over to Admiralty House, and the Governor-General, Peter Cosgrove, met us there. And John Kerry looked out over Sydney Harbour and said, this is amazing. So I added, this is why you should have been here before, just to get an understanding of what Australia's really like.
You were the deputy of 3 different leaders.
Yes.
Brendan Nelson, Tony Abbott and Malcolm Turnbull.
Well, Brendan Nelson, Malcolm Turnbull, Tony Abbott, Malcolm Turnbull. Yeah, it went in that order. So I
Malcolm
had
Turnbull
2
twice.
terms under Malcolm, that's right.
Tell me about the relationship when you're a deputy to your party leader.
The interesting point about the deputy of the Liberal Party is that you are elected directly by the party room. It's about the only position that is not appointed by the leader. And Robert
so he
Menzies,
doesn't get to choose.
No.
Or she.
No, that's
Oh,
right.
one
Robert
day.
Menzies, our founder, did this deliberately. He set it up so that there were 2 positions elected by the party room, the leader and the deputy leader. And that meant the deputy leader was actually answerable to the party room, not to the leader. So the leader couldn't sack the deputy. And I was very conscious of that responsibility and the role of deputy. You were the conduit between the backbench and the leader. So while cabinet ministers were appointed by the leader, while chairs of committees were appointed by the leader, so he who gives can take away, the deputy's position was elected by the whole party room. And so I was re-elected a number of times by the party room. On the last occasion, I didn't stand for re-election.
Why
so
didn't you? Had you just
well,
had
I
a
was
gutful?
no. Well, I was going to stand for
Leader.
and then when I didn't get through that test, I decided not to run for deputy because I thought they need a new team. It would be wise for me to stand aside and let a new team start all over again. So that's what happened. So Josh Frydenberg stood and he was elected, and I didn't stand. So I have an unblemished record as deputy.
There were some leaders that you seemed to get on with better than others, that you were more probably like-minded than others. You and Brendan Nelson remain close friends.
Yes.
You and Malcolm Turnbull seem to be a really good team.
I knew Malcolm from a long time ago. We met in the late 80s when he was a lawyer from Sydney and I was a lawyer in Perth, and our firm briefed Malcolm on some significant litigation at the time.
So you had a long-standing
So I've known
relationship.
Malcolm for a long time. I've been to his birthday parties. I've got to know Lucy well. And Malcolm's father-in-law, Tom Hughes, was a barrister that I briefed on many occasions. So I've known the Turnbull Hughes family for many years. So Malcolm and I were friends before he came into politics. In fact, we both went to the Constitutional Convention back in 1998. He was, heading up the Republican movement, and I was an appointed delegate from Western Australia as a female lawyer at the time. So I've known Malcolm for a long time. So we were friends before he came into politics, and we're friends to this day.
What about Tony Abbott?
Tony was my senior minister when I was the Minister for Ageing. He was the Minister for Health, and so we worked closely together. Professionally, we got along fine. We have different perspectives on a number of social issues, and so we're not as close, obviously. And then when Tony lost the support of the party room, he took it pretty hard and blamed a lot of people, and I think I was included in that group. I didn't ever undermine Tony. I never leaked against him. I was a deputy as competently and as effectively as I could be. But politics can be a very tough game, and people get disappointed about a whole range of things.
When you're the deputy to a leader who you aren't aligned with, perhaps on things like same-sex marriage, perhaps their beliefs about women, how do you manage that?
You respect that your views are different. You respect their views if they're honestly held, and hope that they respect your views that are honestly held. But you can't expect in the leadership team to have the same view on the same issues. And the Liberal Party attracts people across a broad spectrum. You know, John Howard always called it a broad church. And people have different views, different experiences, different perspectives and philosophies and values. And so you work with that. You don't resent it. If you think it's worth advocating a change in position, you can give advice, but at the end of the day, everybody's responsible for their own position and own stance and own views on things. So I didn't ever see it as a problem that I had different views to the leader. In fact, in some ways, it was probably good because it reflected the differences across the Liberal Party.
Do you have to make those challenges or put forward those counter arguments behind closed doors?
Well, generally that's what leadership meetings and cabinet and party room meetings are for. The party room is not as confidential as one would like, but most certainly leadership meetings and cabinet meetings are an opportunity to put different points of view, and that's important. You have to have robust debates and challenge ideas and challenge people's positions so that you get the best outcomes. And I think that if you have a party full of yes men or women, then you're not getting the best outcomes. You've got to have the debate about issues and values and ideas.
Just to finish up, your last day, you had quite a lot of time to think about what you were going to say, what you were going to wear. A lot of people said you wore white to represent the suffragettes.
There is symbolism in what you wear as a public figure, without doubt, and I'm conscious of that. I don't get up in the morning and think, now, what statement shall I make today? Therefore, I'll choose that. But I wanted to wear something that was fresh and bright and didn't meld into the green of the House of Representatives.
That ugly green.
Well, it's sort of a Tasmanian blue gum green, isn't it?
How did you feel when you got up? You spoke for about 8 minutes.
Yeah. I had told the Prime Minister just prior to question time that I intended to announce that I wouldn't recontest the seat. I told the Speaker of the House, and he said that he would give me time after question time. I thought the timing was right, and I simply made the announcement. It wasn't a valedictory. I didn't want to do the legacy and the perhaps somewhat self-indulgent speech about what I'd achieved in my public life. I just wanted to say simply thank you, that it had been an honour and a privilege, and I was a fortunate person to have been able to serve in the House of Representatives. Not many people get to do that in history, and so I was, I felt very proud of what I'd achieved and the fact that I'd fulfilled a dream, and that was to be Australia's Foreign Minister.
You got a standing ovation from
yes,
both sides.
I did. I was very touched by that.
But you didn't stick around to
well,
hear.
It wasn't a valedictory, so I had made my announcement, and then I thought, all right, it's time for me to go. And I didn't appreciate that either the Prime Minister or the Leader of the Opposition was going to say, were going to stand and say something. Nobody told me that they were going to speak, so I was back in my office. Then, whoops, they're all on TV.
I mean, you said you felt relieved and all of those things. What's next?
I will assist in campaigning in Western Australia and perhaps something in Victoria. And then I'll start considering options. People have been very generous with offers and proposals. I hope to do something in the private sector, maybe in academia, and most certainly I'll continue in philanthropic and charitable roles, and a whole basket of things. And I want to keep very busy. I'm sure I will. and do a whole range of things that have the ability to drive my energy and passion. So I'm looking forward to it with a great deal of optimism and excitement even.
Thanks for listening to No Filter. After we recorded that chat, Julie came straight out into the Mamamia office and was an enormously good sport for all the selfies we wanted to take. In fact, she directed the selfies. She's very good at it. She gathered us all together in a group. There were about, 50 of us that all wanted our photo taken. And she was like, you move over here, you get in closer over there. And she sat down on the floor in those incredibly beautiful high heels that she was wearing. And she's just an absolute delight. So it'll be really interesting to see what she does next. Next week on No Filter, David Gillespie joins me to talk about the way in which screen addiction is rewiring the brains of a generation and what we can do about it. If you liked hearing that conversation with Julie and want more Australian politics and news and current affairs and really the stories behind all of those things, listen to our episode of our daily show, The Quickie, about whether or not the Liberal Party have a woman problem. Spoiler alert, they do. Search The Quickie Liberal in your podcast app or follow the links in our show notes. No Filter is produced by Liza Ratliff. I'm Mia Friedman, and I'll see you on Mamamia.